Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It has been a just kind of very chill day. It's been storming outside all day. I've been running laundry. I've been doing little cleaning things, folding stuff. It's just been like a catch-up kind of day. But one of the things I really need to get caught up on is baking some more sandwich bread for the family. I keep running into the store for like little things here and there, but every time I'm at the store, even though I know we don't have any bread at home and I need some sandwich bread for my family, we use it for sandwiches, we use it for toast, we use it for avocado toast, which is one of the breakfasts my 6-year-old Lila requested this week. I look at the bread and I just don't want to buy it, because once you start making your own bread at home, nothing tastes the same, nothing comes close, and it's so simple to make with such few ingredients, especially once you get the hang of it. I've been baking sourdough for a couple years now. It's so simple to do. I just needed to like kick myself in the booty to get it done, you know what I mean? It was one of those things I kept putting off on my list. I'm getting my sourdough starter fed, and today we're making a honey wheat sourdough sandwich bread. If you start it early enough in the day, you can get this done in one day too. It's not a sourdough bread that you need to process for like 12 to 24 hours in the fridge or overnight. I did not get started first thing this morning. As you can tell, it's been a busy day, but we will get it started this evening. We'll see if I end up baking it tonight, or the nice thing about this recipe is if you get most of the way through the process through shaping and you just run out of time, you don't want to wait for the last 2 hours for the last proof before you pop it in the oven. You can stick it in the fridge and do it whenever you have time in the morning. So that might be where we're heading, because I'm tired. I might need to go to bed early tonight, but we'll never know until we start it. So let's get going on this sourdough honey wheat sandwich bread. Good morning, Winnie, my sourdough starter. Today we are going to feed her because we are going to be making some homemade honey wheat sandwich bread. To feed her, I'm adding 1/3 cup of water and 1/3 cup of either bread flour or a high protein all-purpose flour, like the organic one from Kirkland's at Costco. Once you've added your feed ingredients, you're gonna use a non-metallic spoon, spatula. They have wooden ones as well. And we're just gonna mix it until it's all combined. You wanna really scrape that starter from the bottom of your jar and get it well incorporated. Really get in there and scrape down the sides and get all the way down in the corners of the jar. The ending consistency will kind of be like a thick pancake batter. You want some sort of a glass jar to keep your starter in. I use this old honey jar, hence the name Winnie, for our sourdough starter, like Winnie the Pooh. I kind of like it because it has this nutrition facts label. It's been washed a bunch, so it's kind of peeling away. But it has a nutrition facts label on it, so I can use some of the lines from the nutrition facts to kind of keep a gauge on how high my starter is rising throughout the feed time, without additional markings like using markers or a rubber band. You will also need to have something to cover it. Some people use paper towel with a rubber band. I've started using coffee filters because you want to cover it, but it needs to be able to breathe. And then the ring for a mason jar, which fits perfectly on this jar as well. It's breathable, it's easy to take on and off. So anyway, that's what we've been doing. My journey with sourdough started as actually a fun science experiment with my older daughter Lila just over 2 years ago. So our starter is just over 2 years old. She has changed and grown so much in that time. We have a nice sour flavor, but not too sour. I've used only all-purpose and white bread flours with my starter, so it has a very neutral taste in breads. I can always make a heartier bread like I am today with a honey wheat bread by adding wheat flour to the recipe instead of to my starter. I've also done something similar by adding rye flour into the recipe, but I keep my actual starter just white flour, bread flour. That way I have a very neutral taste when it comes to baking things other than just breads, like when I bake English muffins or bagels. I'll attach my whole sourdough playlist in the iCard above if you guys want to check out some of those other recipes I've shared. But for now, we have fed her, and typically it takes about 4 hours for my starter to double in size. So right now she is hitting just the base of the label. I'm gonna be looking for her to hit at least this mark here in the label of the nutrition facts for us to know that she has doubled in size, is risen, airy and bubbly, and ready to be baked with. It is winter time and a little chillier in my house today, so some things you can do to help your starter along are either to store them in your microwave while it's rising, or I also like to turn the light on in my oven and place it on the rack. Now be careful when you do this. You have to make sure you're aware of it, and don't turn your oven on or you'll cook it. Once our starter has risen, we're gonna use 150 grams to make 1 large loaf of bread. And then slowly we're going in with 325 grams of water. I like to do mine about room temperature, not cold, not hot for sure, because you don't wanna kill off all your active grams of starter. And then I tared out my scale so it's back at 0, and I'm going to slowly add bread flour. We need 340 grams of bread flour. With the scale tared out again, this time we only need about 160 grams of some whole wheat flour. And then we're gonna add 30 grams of an oil. This is melted butter because that's what I have home right now, but you could do avocado oil or olive oil. And this is 40 grams of honey. Put your oil in first before your honey and it'll slide right out. And 10 grams of salt. Once all the ingredients are in here, you're just gonna mix it up. It's gonna be a wet dough. Use a spatula and just keep stirring until everything comes together. All that flour is incorporated. All right, once we have everything incorporated, we have a sticky kind of wet bread dough. I'm covering this with a damp flour sack towel. You can use any sort of a tea towel. Just wanna use one that's gonna be lint-free because as it rises, you don't want any bits stuck in your dough. So I'm covering this, setting it aside, and it's going to proof for about an hour before we come back and start some sets of stretches and folds. All right, it has been 1 hour. We're back, and my hands are slightly damp, and we're gonna start our stretch and folds. So we're just going to kind of lift the dough up from the edges before we start grabbing like the top side. Stretch all the way that you can, fold it to the middle. Quarter turn your bowl. Lift your edge, fold over to the middle. So that was a quarter turn for each side of the bowl. So if you're thinking of it like a square, even though it's a round bowl, you know what I mean. So like the north, east, south, and west corner all stretched up, folded to the middle, and folded over itself. Coming back with our damp cloth, leave it for 30 minutes covered, and then we'll be back for another set of stretch and folds. 30 minutes later, and I did another set of 4 stretch and folds. Then we're recovering it with that damp cloth, setting it aside for another 30 minutes, coming back for round 3, another set of 4 stretch and folds, covering it with the damp cloth, setting it aside, and then 30 minutes later, we come back for our 4th and final set of stretch and folds. After completing 4 sets of stretch and folds over 2 hours, I'm now going to leave my dough sitting covered with the damp cloth on the counter for another 2 hours. This is my bulk proofing on the counter. You'll know it's completed when you have lots of big airy bubbles. I then greased up my loaf pan. I'm just using some avocado oil spray in this glass loaf dish. Once my dish is prepped, I'm flouring my countertop, flipping the dough onto my clean and floured counter. The dough should release on its own from the bowl. Just turn it upside down and give it a little shake to get it started. I gave an extra sprinkle of flour so it wouldn't be so sticky, and then I stretched it out into a large rectangle shape. Careful not to deflate too many of the bubbles. You want some of that airiness in your bread. Then once it was in the shape of a large rectangle, I folded the 2 sides in towards the middle, but not overlapping. Then I started at one end of my bread and rolled towards the top into a log. Once it's all rolled up, I like to do a couple push and pulls on the log. I start with the log farther away from me and gently tuck and pull it back towards me, sliding it along the counter. This is gonna create some nice tension in the dough. I did that a couple times and made sure to pinch the ends and made sure everything was all tucked up tight, then transferred it into my greased baking dish. Once inside, I covered the top with some cling wrap. You just want a nice tight seal on it, especially because I'm gonna be placing this in the fridge overnight to finish its last proof instead of letting it sit out on the counter. It was a busy morning. It is the next day, late afternoon, and I'm just getting around to baking this, but that's okay. As long as it's kept in the fridge, it does really well and it won't overproof. So it's nice and puffy. I'm gonna let this sit on the counter for another hour to come up to room temp before I pop it in the oven to bake. Once my bread was up to room temp, I preheated my oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And I also placed a pan with a couple inches of water on the bottom rack while my oven preheated. This will create a nice moist and steamy environment, which is great for helping bread to rise. I tented some foil over the top of my bread, making sure to leave some space so it wouldn't get stuck, just to again help keep some of that moisture in. You don't want the top of your bread to bake too fast, or it'll prevent the rest of the loaf from rising over the full baking time. After 30 minutes, I removed the foil tent and then let it bake for an additional 15 minutes, letting it brown up on top. After pulling it out of the oven, I just lightly buttered the top of this bread. It gives it a nice glossy finish on top. I let it cool down for about 15 minutes and then used a butter knife just to go around the edges of the dish to help it release easy. Before it's fully cooled, I popped it out of its pan and onto a cutting board or cooling rack to finish cooling for at least 2 hours before you slice into this beautiful bread. After my bread cooled for 2 hours, I wrapped it in cloth and set it aside for overnight. Now in the morning, I have fresh homemade sandwich bread for the family. I made my daughter Lila a peanut butter jelly sandwich on this to take for school lunch. And now I'm getting started on some avocado toast for breakfast this morning. It's soft and airy, yet very sturdy, so it cuts quite easily. You can get nice thin slices off of it by just using a bread knife. Once cut, I just store in a Ziploc airtight bag. You could also put it in a container that's airtight or in a bread box, but this will store really well just in my pantry or on the counter for a couple days. Remember, these don't have any preservatives in them, so if you're not going to eat it up within a couple days, my family will sail through this loaf in probably 2 or 3 days max between toast and sandwiches. But if you're not gonna go through a whole loaf that fast, just slice the whole thing and put it in a Ziploc freezer bag and pop it in the freezer. You can pull it out slice by slice as you need it. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed today's sourdough recipe. Subscribe so you don't miss out on more of my content coming up. And until next time, bye. I get up, I always do. I never think, I always do. Never thought